Hi, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to go through some techniques to give you some cohesion and glue on your drum bus. Now, quite often we're using drums from different sources, different sample packs, etc. Or maybe you've created a large dynamic range with your choice of kicks, snares and hi-hats. So adding some glue, some compression, etc. on the drum bus can really help bring all of that together and give you a much better mix. Let's jump in. So I think the best way to demonstrate this is to do it in a real world situation, so you've got something to relate to. So I've programmed 2 drum beats into the MPC, a house beat, 4 on the floor, standard thing, and a boom bap beat. Nothing groundbreaking or anything like that, just really a demonstration. So we'll start off with the house beat, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the processes that I go through to get some glue and some cohesion on the drum bus. And I'll also be sharing a preset as well, which you can download and try out yourself. So we'll start off with the house drum beat. Pretty standard 4 on the floor stuff. Now what I have done is kind of on purpose is I've not made this drum beat completely balanced. The snare drums are poking out a little bit and the hats are perhaps a little bit too loud in the mix. But the reason I've done this is for 2 reasons really. One, I want to be able to show you and be able to demonstrate the effect of adding drum bus glue, because if I had it absolutely balanced perfectly, then the effect is going to be so subtle it's going to be difficult to tell. So I'm kind of overemphasizing things here, and I will overemphasize the compression and stuff as well to really show you how to do it, because it can be a subtle affair. So it's a choice between whether you really want a heavily compressed sound, a heavily glued sound, or whether you want it to be subtle. But the other reason why I've done that is, especially on house and hip hop, sometimes it's actually nice to have the snares poking out a little bit louder than they should be, so that you can apply the drum bus glue and you have to kind of over apply it. And therefore, by doing that, you in effect get a little bit more of a processed sound, which might be the sound that you're aiming for. If everything was perfectly balanced, then you wouldn't have to do that and you wouldn't get that sound as much. So make the decision. Do you want your drums to sound compressed, to sound punchy, to stand out and have that glued sound, or do you want it to be a lot more subtle? Obviously the processing that I'm going to show you now is not going to work if you're working with a jazz band and you're not going to heavily compress jazz drums, because you want a dynamic range with those. The same as if you're working with maybe more subtle kind of ballad acoustic instruments, that kind of stuff. You really don't want that compressed sound. But generally, and I say generally, with house music, dance music, EDM, club music, lo-fi, hip hop, that kind of stuff, you do kind of want that gelled, glued feeling. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. It's going to be the real kind of drum bus glued sound. So as I said, we've got the house one. I've got them all in the same program, so I can process them all together, and I'll show you what effects I'm using, and then I'll explain exactly why. We have Air Compressor, PEQ and MPC 60. Let's take them out for now. So with the compressor, the aim of the compression is to glue everything, is to bring everything together, to give it cohesion. And so I'll show you exactly what I've done here. Now you can see there's not a whole lot going on, and it isn't instantly noticeable unless you really home in on a few things, which I'll explain. So with drum bus, anything between a ratio of 2:1 to 4:1 are pretty good to go for, pretty good ballpark to go for. But there is no rules, you have to use your ears. And bear in mind, with the ratio, you're controlling the amount of compression that's happening. So I would tend to go, maybe I'll start with 2:1 and then I'll work my way up to 4:1. With the attack and the release, they're quite important. To get that nice punchy glued sound, a good way to do that is to have a slower attack to let the transient of the drums through, and then a quick release to get that clampy, punchy kind of sound. So as you can see here, I've gone for 30 milliseconds and then the fastest release that you can actually go for on the air compressor. Now the reason why I've used the air compressor is because it's quite transparent. And I don't really, on a house beat like this, I don't really want to imprint too much of a compression sound. If I wanted to, I would probably use the other compressors that are available in the MPC. There's no rules. It's a decision that you would make. Do you want some color? So maybe you would use a kind of tube amp or a VCA amp, or do you want it to be quite transparent but still have that compressed sound? So therefore I'm using the air compressor because it's quite transparent. I'm getting a couple of decibels gain reduction, but I'm going to push it a little bit more just to show you. I've got the knee at 0% and the mix at 100% at the moment as well. But one of the things that I can do is I can use parallel compression, which will basically be blending the compressed signal with the dry signal using the mix control here, which is what that's for. And a way that you can use that is to maybe over compress slightly and then blend some of the dry signal back in again. That's a technique that a lot of engineers use on the drum bus, or in effect a lot of compression techniques would be used in that way, would be to blend the dry with the wet and over compress it slightly. So let's just listen to the compressor again. I'm going to push to threshold. Now listen to what the snares are doing. Because the snares are actually poking out before compression, they're going to be what the compressor grabs hold of first. So they're going to be pushing the drum, the snare drum into the kick drum and giving it that nice kind of glued sound. And also they're going to be grabbing hold of the hats as well, which are a little bit louder than they probably should be, but I've done that on purpose. So at that point, you're starting to hear it sounding a little bit too compressed. So listen to the snare drum. When I bring the compression in, the snare kind of starts being rounded off very, very slightly in, and it just levels out with the kick drum and it's pushed onto it and gives it that nice sort of punchy sound. Okay, so I kind of like how that's set up there. What I will quite often do after compression is add some EQ. The reason is, especially on the compressors in the MPC, they don't have any side chains, so you can't reduce the amount that the kick drum has the effect on the compressor, which you can often do in plugins on DAWs, etc. So you're going to lose a little bit of low end on the air compressor and any of the compressors in the MPC. So I want to bring back some of that. Also, I want to bring back a little bit more clarity to the snare drum and just a little bit more tops on the hi-hats as well. So I'm using a very, very simple EQ here, the PEQ, because it's a shelving EQ. It's kind of more of a general broad stroke EQ, like a Pultec, rather than a very, very surgical EQ. And what I'm doing is I'm giving it some low shelf to bring back the bottom end and a little bit of top, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, that is it. I'm literally doing a smiley face, adding a little bit of top and a little bit of low end. So you can see here it's around about 7,000 and then some lows at about 88. Now bear in mind with shelving EQs as well, it's set at 88, but what it's doing is it's boosting everything below because it's a shelf rather than a bell. So it's bringing up all that low end on the kick drum and in the actual track. So I'll take it out and then I'll drop it back in. I really focus on the kick drum when I take it out. Listen to the kick, it's kind of there, it's present, it's okay. But when you bring in the EQ, it sounds a lot rounder and the tightness comes in. So as you can hear, when I bypass both the compression and the EQ, there is quite a lot of difference. There's not too much of a level difference. There's a little bit of a loudness difference, but not very much. So, but you can hear straight away that it just sounds more present, it sounds fuller, it sounds bigger, it really opens the drum beat up. Just with that minor amount of compression and minor amount of EQ, but just doing that kind of gels it. So we'll just do that again before I just drop in the final effect that I use. So let's take it out first. It really opens the drum beat up and kind of brings the mid-range forward a bit. What I often do, and you've probably, if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen me probably do this 100 times, well, maybe not 100 times, MPC 60 at the end. What MPC 60 does, and I've said this before as well, I don't care if it sounds like an MPC 60, but it really gives a nice low end, but a nice tight punchy low end. It's not a boomy low end where you just kind of lose control and it's a bit flappy. So it just really tightens it up. So I'm going to drop that in and out, and it really finishes things off for me on the drum bus. I mean, that's already sounding good. Listen to the snare drum as well. When I drop the MPC 60 in, there's a real slight amount of saturation, sort of some harmonics kind of being brought in round about 2K. And it just makes the snare drum sound a little bit crunchy. So I'll take that out again. If you just listen to the snare drum. Okay, so moving on to the boom bap beat, it's very simple. But it sounds a little bit lifeless. So could I change the sounds, or could I add some drum bus compression, glue, etc.? So that's what I'm going to do here. So again, I've gone for the air compressor and the PEQ, but the settings are a little bit different. So in the air compressor, I'll show you exactly what I'm doing here. So now again with this, I purposely had the snare drum not really balanced particularly well, and the hat's not particularly balanced very well. But by doing this, by adding this compression, got a quite high ratio again, up to 4. And I'm doing a little bit more work with the threshold. The attack and the release are pretty much the same. I've still got that punchy sound. The attack's a little bit longer, a little bit slower rather. Release is still as quick. And I'm also doing a bit of blending as well with the mix control you can see here. But if you listen to how it goes from being a bit lifeless to just suddenly squeezing together and sounding, you know, like a proper drum beat would, or how you'd want it to sound in a hip hop track. You know, there really the snare drum sounds a little bit weak, and you know, my first thought would be, oh, do I need to swap out the snare drum? Now you can hear that you've lost quite a lot of low end, and that you've sacrificed that because you're using the compressor. The compressor is getting, the kick drum is hitting the compressor, and you're losing some of the low end from that. So obviously, as I said, afterwards I've gone for some EQ. But I've been pretty heavy here on the EQ. There's a lot of low end. You can see 6.5 at 63. That's a lot of low end. And with this as well, I've scooped out a little bit of mud at 187. You can see there 2.3. And I've brought a bit of clarity back with the snare drum and the lower mids at 1700. But I've really pushed the kick drum here. And it's really nice because the compression has tightened the drum beat up and glued it together, and then just adding this EQ afterwards, this real broad stroke Pultec style EQ, the PEQ, just really gives it a lot of beef, and adds a little bit of crunch as well, because there is a little bit of character to this EQ. It's not a transparent EQ. I think it's supposed to be kind of modelled on maybe a Neve or maybe a Pultec, but it's definitely got a little bit of saturation and some harmonics in there as well. So I'm going to drop it out first. You can really hear the kick drum come through. So there you have it. I mean, it's actually quite simple if you think of it in the way that you add some compression to bring everything together, to glue everything together, give it that cohesion, and then polish it off with some EQ. Be that some extra low end for some oomph and some, you know, maybe scoop some mud out, add a bit of clarity in the mid-range, and then just add some tops. And that will get you where you need to be with your drum bus. Two very, very simple processes. Now, I will be sharing a preset, but please bear in mind that whilst this preset is a pretty good chain to get yourself in the ballpark, every single drum beat is different. So don't copy my settings exactly. You know, you're going to have to dial them in yourself. But if you follow, you know, what I've done there, where you're getting the compression to glue everything together and then polishing it off with the EQ, you're going to be able to get yourself where you need to be. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more mixing, mastering and MPC tutorials and reviews. This is the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.